Greetings, everyone. We are going to be reading AB 1950, the California Assembly Bill 1950, which is about, and I'll let Kim explain more about this bill we're reading.
Well, the bill title, City of Los Angeles, former Chavez Ravine property, eminent domain compensation. So there's been some chatter in the YouTube streets about this bill, and ETM Media, of course, wanted to do what ETM Media does and read through the bill to see exactly what's in it. So that's what we will be doing today. So let's get started. Bill title, City of Los Angeles, former Chavez Ravine property, eminent domain compensation, spectrum, partisan bill, Democratic 1-0, status introduced 2024, or that would be March 21st, 2024, from committee chair with authors amendments, amend and re-refer to COM on judiciary, read second time and amended AB 1950 detailed. All right, so we have amended in assembly March 21st, 2024, California Legislature 2023-2024 regular session, Assembly Bill number 1950. Introduced by Assembly Member Wendy Carrillo, January 29, 2024. An Act to add Chapter 16.5, commencing with Section 7278 to Division 7 of Title 1 of Government Code relating to local government. Legislative Council's Digest, AB 1950, as amended, Wendy Carrillo, City of Los Angeles, former Chavez Ravine property, eminent domain compensation. The California Constitution authorizes private property to be taken or damaged for public use only if just compensation is paid. Existing law, the eminent domain law, prescribes how that constitutionality authorized power may be exercised for eminent domain proceeding commenced on or after January 1st, 1976, as specified. Under the eminent domain law, an owner of property acquired by eminent domain is entitled to compensation as provided. Existing law provides that whenever a program or project to be undertaken by public entity will result in displacement of a person or displaced persons as defined, is entitled to payment for actual moving and related expenses as the public entity determines to be reasonable and necessary. The bill would require the City of Los Angeles to create a task force for the purpose of providing compensation to former residents and landowners displaced by the Chavez Ravine area of Los Angeles as defined between 1950 to 1961, inclusive, and their lineal descendants. The bill would set forth the composition of the task force, consisting of 9 members as specified. Among other duties, the task force would be required to oversee the city's administration process pursuant to these provisions and to create specified reports addressing various matters related to compensation for former residents and landowners of Chavez Ravine and their descendants. The bill will require the City of Los Angeles to decide on one of several forms of compensation, including conveying city-owned real property for housing, use, and enjoyment equal to square footage area of land acquired by the city from the property owners, or monetary compensation for taking of the former landowner's private property equal to the fair market value at the time of the sale or taking, adjusted for inflation. The bill would provide that compensation would be exempt from taxation and the real property tax. This bill would additionally require the city to construct a permanent memorial in recognition of the displaced residents and landowners of the Chavez Ravine community. The bill would also require the city to create and administer a searchable database to access information related to the Chavez Ravine as specified.
All right, I'll go ahead and take the next page. By imposing new duties on the city and city officials, the bill would impose a state-mandated local program. The bill would authorize a person to bring a private right of action against the city to enforce the above described provisions in accordance with certain requirements and timeframes. The bill would specify available remedies, which would include injunctive relief, attorney's fees, and punitive and compensatory damages. The bill would provide that the city would not have governmental immunity with respect to a cause of action brought under these provisions. This bill would make legislative findings and declarations as to the necessity of a special statute for the city of Los Angeles. The California Constitution requires the state to reimburse local agencies and school districts for certain costs mandated by the state. Statutory provisions establish procedures for making that reimbursement. This bill would provide that if the Commission on State Mandates determines that the bill contains costs mandated by the state, reimbursement for those costs shall be made pursuant to the statutory provisions noted above. All right. The people of the state of California do enact as follows. Section 1, the legislator finds and declares all of the following. A. The United States of America has not fully addressed governmental involvement in redlining, racial covenants, housing segregation, and other discriminatory housing practices experienced by Native, Latinx, Black, Asian, and Pacific Islander communities. B. Federal, state, and local governments have deliberately structured the availability of opportunities, implemented policies and practices, and assigned value based on race, physical characteristics, and national origin, which has and continues to perpetuate unjust disadvantages for Native, Latinx, Black, Asian, and Pacific Islander communities. C. Systemic discrimination based on race and ethnicity continues to hinder entire communities from realizing their full potential, as evidenced by segregation, Jim Crow laws, and Undesirable Aliens Act of 1929. Historical practices include state-sanctioned housing discrimination through redlining and the enforcement of racially restrictive covenants. Additionally, there has been inequitable access to opportunities for social mobility and wealth creation due to poor access to care, health, resources, and education for underrepresented communities of color. D. These historic inequities have resulted in the deprivation of marginalized communities from access to land and retention of their property rights, economic opportunities, and general wealth. E. Against this backdrop of racially motivated policies, the injustices in the city of Los Angeles City, communities of La Loma, Bishop, and Palo Verde stand as a stark example where residents were unjustly removed without proper compensation, epitomizing the ongoing struggle for equity and justice in housing and land rights. F. References to Chavez Ravine shall be made throughout this act, yet it is important to clarify that there was no singular Chavez Ravine neighborhood. Instead, there were 3 district neighborhoods, La Loma, Bishop, and Palo Verde, that have over time been collectively referred to in public discourse and historiography as Chavez Ravine. This act uses the term Chavez Ravine as a shorthand to represent the collective experience of all 3 neighborhoods, acknowledging the historical conflation of their identities. G. The Chavez Ravine neighborhood is approximately 315 acres and is in northeast Los Angeles. Chavez Ravine housed more than 1,800 families and is an example of how racial discrimination against people of color reached crisis proportions and resulted in the forced displacement of an estimated 3,800 individuals. The displacement of these residents has caused large long-lasting disparities in housing, family stability, health, mental wellness, education, employment, economic development, public safety, and justice. H. Despite the perspectives of outsiders and City of Los Angeles officials who often label the community as a, quote, vacant shantytown, end quote, the poor man's Shangri-La, end quote, and an eyesore, quote unquote, these neighborhoods were in fact vibrant and cohesive communities serving as a hub for ownership and economic development and growth for people of color.
All right, thank you for that. I'll go ahead and pick it up. I. In 1950, Chavez Ravine's 315 acres were earmarked by the city as a prime location for redevelopment. The city condemned the community land through the power of eminent domain for the purpose of constructing public housing. That same year, Chavez Ravine residents and property owners received letters from the city demanding the sale of their homes to make the land available for the proposed Ellison Park project. The city promised displaced families that they would have the opportunity to return to new homes in the newly developed housing project. J. As a result of these intentional acts consistent with a racially motivated history of redlining and property seizure, by 1952 the community was a ghost town, and in the following years the land would be sold below market value or auctioned off against the will of the landowners. Churches, schools, and cemeteries were bulldozed and buried. The promises of new permanent housing would be abandoned, and land titles were never returned to the original owners. By 1958, the Ellison Park Heights housing project had unraveled, and the city conveyed that Chavez Ravine land conveyed the Chavez Ravine land to a private entity for an insignificant amount considering the land's value. The private entity built a sports stadium and parking lot on the site. Chavez Ravine was wrongfully condemned land, and its residents were displaced and unjustly deprived of their constitutional right to own property. The fraudulent appropriation of land from private individuals on the basis of race, ethnicity, or national origin is against the public interest and denies individuals and communities the right to enjoyment, ownership, and inheritance of land, as well as the inalienable right to control one's property. I. The government has a responsibility. Wait, H-I-J-K. L, sorry. L. The government has a responsibility to prohibit and eliminate racial and ethnic discrimination in all forms and to ensure that all persons are entitled to security against forced removal from housing, harassment, and intimidation by the entities that deprive individuals their right to self-determination and dignity on the basis of race. M. As set forth in presidential landmark legislation, Senate Bill 796, Chapter 435 of the Statutes of 2021, government must act in the public's interest to ensure that communities can fairly access justice and effective remedy, including, when appropriate, the potential return, restitution, resettlement, rehabilitation, and compensation for unlawful race-based displacements. N. Actions taken by the city disenfranchised more than 1,800 Angelino families and approximately 3,800 individuals in the Chavez Ravine area. It is in the interest of the public, the state of California, the county of Los Angeles, and the city to create a task force to oversee and report on the investigation and assessed value of the lost housing and land, the compensation requirements for displaced residents and landowners of Chavez Ravine, potential compensation for their descendants, the construction of a memorial to be erected on the Chavez Ravine site, and a private cause of action enforced for any parties not otherwise compensated through the administrative process. Section 2, Chapter 16.5, commencing with Section 7278, is added to Division 7 of Title 1 of the Government Code to read Chapter 16.5, Chavez Ravine Community, 7278A1. The following provisions set forth in this chapter apply to all 315 acres of the land in the Chavez Ravine community acquired by the City of Los Angeles, including the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, acquisition through eminent domain, coercive means, and land conveyed to private entities to construct a sports stadium. 2. The purpose of this chapter is to provide compensation to residents and landowners displaced from Chavez Ravine area between 1950 to 1961 inclusive. B. For purposes of this chapter, the following definitions apply. 1. City means the City of Los Angeles. 2. County means the County of Los Angeles. 3A. Descendant means a lineal descendant born in a direct biological line from a displaced descendant of the Chavez Ravine property. Descendants may include, but are not limited to, a person's children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. B. Any compensation awarded pursuant to this chapter to the descendant shall be divided into as many equal shares as there are surviving descendants in the generation nearest to the designated ancestor. Any compensation transferred to the descendants shall follow the same rules of inheritance as those applied in cases of intestacy. C1. The city shall create a task force in accordance with the requirements set forth in subdivision H upon the city's review of the task force reports and compensation recommendations as outlined in subdivision J. The city shall decide on one of the following forms of compensation for former landowners and their descendants. A. Convey city-owned real property for housing use and enjoyment equal to the square footage area of land acquired by the city from the property owners unjustly displaced between 1950 and 1961 inclusive, notwithstanding any other law or legislative or administrative approvals by the city council or other department shall be necessary for the implementation of this section, and the property shall be exempt from Surplus Land Act and other public transfer restrictions only for the purpose of this chapter. B. Compensation for taking a former landowner's private property through monetary compensation equal to the fair market value at the time of the sale or taking, adjusted for inflation. The monetary compensation shall be exempt from taxation and the real property tax transfer only for purposes of this chapter. 2. Upon the review of the task force reports and compensation recommendations as described in subdivision J, the city shall provide compensation to former residents or descendants of residents who were not landowners in the form of relocation benefits, health care benefits, employment-oriented services, educational scholarship, or other forms of compensation deemed fair and equitable by the task force in accordance with this section.
All right, I'll go ahead and take the next page. 3. The city shall review the task force recommendations and other reports pursuant to the section and determine other additional compensation for former residents only if deemed to serve the best interests of the city and the public. Review shall occur no later than June 1st, 2028. A one-time 6-month extension until December 2028 may be granted by the task force upon written request. 4. The city shall submit a report to the task force in public no later than January 1st, 2029, detailing the methods and timeline for compensating residents and former landowners of Chavez Ravine. A one-time 6-month extension until June 1st, 2029 may be granted by the task force upon written request. D. On or before January 1st, 2027, the city shall create an official and complete historical accounting of the property owners and residents who were evicted or displaced, their descendants, and land acquired through eminent domain or other coercive tactics. Further, the historical accounting report shall also include a review and report about the appropriation of land from private persons from 1950 to 1961 inclusive. A one-time 6-month extension until June 1st, 2027 may be granted by the task force upon written request. E. The city shall create and administer a public access searchable database including all the city and county information related to Chavez Ravine. The database shall include, but not limited to, all of the following. 1. The names and addresses of former residents and landowners evicted or displaced. 2. All notices to residents and landowners from the local, state, and federal government. 3. Payment receipts by public and private agencies for purchase of property located in the Chavez Ravine community. 4. Land acquisition methods used by all public agencies to acquire the Chavez Ravine property. 5. Arrest records related to removal of residents and landowners. 6. Names and divisions of government involved in the displacement of Chavez Ravine residents. 7. Correspondence between the city and the county and private entities, public government agencies, residents, landowners of Chavez Ravine. F. The searchable database shall be made available to the public and task force no later than January 1st, 2027. A one-time 6-month extension until June 1st, 2027 may be granted by the task force upon written request. G. The city shall construct a permanent memorial to be erected no later than December 31st, 2028 in recognition of the displaced residents and landowners of the Chavez Ravine community. The memorial shall include interpretive and informational signs and structures, as well as areas to accommodate public gathering and contemplation. It includes educating future generations regarding the impact of this displacement and historical discriminatory policies in the city. A one-time 6-month extension until May 31st, 2029 may be granted by the task force upon written request. H. The task force shall oversee and report on the matters set forth in subdivisions C, D, F, and G. The task force shall consist of the following 9 members. 1. An elected official of the city or county or an elected official designee thereof who shall serve as the chair of the task force. 2. One individual appointed by the president pro tempore of the Senate and one individual appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly who shall both serve as the Chavez chairperson of the task force. 3. 2 descendants of displaced Chavez Ravine landowners or residents appointed by the mayor of the city of Los Angeles. 4. The president of the United Farm Workers, UFW, or the president's designee. 5. The president of Public Counsel or the president's designee. 6. The chairperson of Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, MALDEF, or the chairperson's designee. 7. One member of the local Gabrielino Tongva Nation appointed by the council member representing the Chavez Ravine area. I. Members of the task force shall not be entitled to receive per diem or any form of similar compensation for their participation in the task force. J. The task force shall oversee and create a report addressing all the following terms. 1. Progress on the city's construction of the permanent memorial as described in subdivision G. 2. Recommendations on appropriate ways to educate the California public of the city and county's findings pursuant to subdivisions D, E, and F no later than January 1st, 2028. 3. Recommendations to the city regarding compensation for former residents and landowners of Chavez Ravine or their descendants based on the information established in subdivisions C, D, E, and F.
All right. 4. Recommendations on any additional appropriate compensation in consideration of the task force's findings regarding former residents on the matters described in paragraphs 3 of subdivision C. 5. Identification of all the divisions of government that were involved and responsible for the displacement in Chavez Ravine. K1. The task force shall also submit to the legislature a comprehensive report detailing its recommended remedies for compensation to former Chavez Ravine residents. The report shall also include strategies for educating the public about the history and impact of Chavez Ravine displacements. Those recommendations and educational incentives shall be submitted for legislative review and action on or before January 1st, 2028. A one time 6 months extension until June 1st, 2028 may be granted by the task force upon written request. 2. The report submitted pursuant to the subdivision shall be submitted in compliance with Section 9795. The task force shall oversee the city's administration process of compensation for former Chavez Ravine residents, landowners, or their descendants. 7278.1a. A person may bring a private right of action against the city in a court of competent jurisdiction to enforce this chapter in accordance with the requirements of this section. A private right of action may be brought on behalf of former residents of descendants of Chavez Ravine who were not compensated pursuant to the process established in the subdivision A of section 7278. B. A private right of action may be brought only on or after January 1st, 2031, or at the end of the extension period granted to the city and task force pursuant to section 7278, whichever occurs later. However, an action shall be brought after January 1st, 2035, unless the extension is granted by the court. To qualify for an extension, the person bringing the action shall meet all of the following criteria. 1. Not have received compensation pursuant to the process established in subdivision C of section 7278. 2. Have resided at or owned property located within the 315 acres of land comprising the former Chavez Ravine community at the time the city acquired the property. 3. Have had their property acquired by the city or its agents through eminent domain, through the sale to the city or another conveyance by the city to private entities between 1950 and 1961 inclusive. C. The available remedies for private right of action include, but are not limited to, injunctive relief, court costs and fees, and attorney fees and costs. Punitive and compensatory damages may also be awarded by the court without the need for the aggrieved party to demonstrate negligence, recklessness, or intentional harm. D. Notice the city shall not be required before the filing of the cause of action pursuant to this section. E. Notwithstanding any other provision, the city shall have governmental immunity with respect to a cause of action brought pursuant to this section. Section 3. The provisions of this act are severable if any provision of this act or its application is held invalid, that invalidity shall not affect other provisions or applications that can be given effect without the invalid provision or application. Section 4. The legislature finds and declares that a special statute is necessary and that a general statute cannot be made applicable within the meaning of Section 16 of Article 4 of the California Constitution because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the land ownership and tenant rights on land known as Chavez Ravine. Section 5. If the Commission on State Mandates determines that this act contains costs mandated by the state, reimbursement to local agencies and school districts for those costs shall be made pursuant to Part 7, commencing with Section 17500 of Division 4 of Title II of the Government Code. And then we have some redacted information here as well.
All right, Kim, could we go up to back up it's the line. Okay, section 3.
Hmm.
I think you looked over. It says, notwithstanding any other provision, the city shall not have governmental immunity. I think you skipped the not part, so I just wanted to clarify that. So it says, notwithstanding any other provision, the city shall not have governmental immunity with respect to cause.
Oh, shall
So
not have
yeah,
governmental immunity. Okay,
yeah. I think you
thank.
said the city shall have governmental immunity. So
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Thank you for catching that. All right. So, any thoughts on this bill 1950, Assembly Bill 1950?
Well, one thing that definitely stood out to me, and we've gotten feedback from some of the Black American community, that why do we have to have studies? Why do we have to have commissions and so forth? Well, other people do as well, so it's just part of the process.
And I noticed also, this is heavily about the Chavez Ravine. Obviously, we would need to see the demographics on the 1800 residents that were impacted. But as you noted, this bill does include, um, where's the line about? Oh, okay. Uh, Unjust disadvantages for Native, Latinx, Black, Asian, and Pacific Islander communities. I noticed, that they include them in the text, but in the makeup of the task force, I didn't see the NAACP. I didn't see any other groups represented as being on the task force for those additional members in the community.
Yeah, I mean, if we're being fair, you think you'd want everybody who's represented in that area to be included in this particular claim.
Right. Or have some representation on the task force if it
Yeah.
is indeed for everyone.
Yeah, so let's see who was. Yeah, there you. No, is that it? I can't.
Yeah, an elected official of the city or
There you go.
county of the
Yeah.
elected official designee. So they have to have an elected official actually be the chair of this task force.
Hmm.
And then we go into a couple of other picks by the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the Assembly. But then we go to, let's see, two descendants displaced from Chavez Ravine, landowners or residents appointed by the mayor, the president of the United Farm Workers, UFW, the president of Public Council or the president's designee, the chairperson of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and one member of the local. You want to do that? You did a nice job saying that one before.
Uh,
Gabrielino.
yep, Gabrielino Tongva or something like that. Sounds good to me.
Good enough. Good enough for government work. So yeah, I see a lot of Mexican representation and organizations, um, but not from the other groups that were impacted. Yeah.
And I'm wondering why the United Farm Workers would be involved in this. Like, why would they need an appointee on this task force?
Why don't you take a guess?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, were they involved between 1950 and 1961 in that area? Like, it's just a question. I mean, we'd have to probably do our further research on it, but just be like, why?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. But very very interesting. I think for those that are watching this and reviewing it, let us know what you think too. Put us in the comments, or you can hit us up at etmmediagroup@gmail.com to see what we may have missed and what we can also learn from this.
All right, and let us know if you, support this bill, Assembly Bill 1950.
All right, fam. Well, please like and subscribe and share and hit that bell and do all that other stuff.
All
And
that good stuff.
yep, and check us out Sundays right here on Eminent Mass Media Group, the California Road to Reparation show, where we'll be talking about upcoming bills that are going to be impacting our community.
Stay aware and get engaged.
All right, peace and reparations.